What is an earnest money deposit? An earnest money deposit, EMD, also known as earnest money or simply a deposit, is a sum of money that a buyer puts down as a sign of good faith when entering into a real estate transaction. It is a way to demonstrate to the seller that the buyer is serious about purchasing the property. The EMD is typically submitted along with the buyer's offer to purchase a property. The primary purposes of an earnest money deposit are showing serious intent. By providing an earnest money deposit, the buyer shows the seller that they are committed to the transaction and have genuine intentions to buy the property. Binding agreement. In many cases, the EMD is held in an escrow account until the sale is finalized. This creates a legally binding agreement between the parties, as the buyer has put down money that they could potentially lose if they back out of the deal without a valid reason. Compensation for seller. If the buyer backs out of the deal without a valid reason, as specified in the contract, the seller may be entitled to keep the earnest money as compensation for the time the property was off the market and any potential costs incurred. Negotiation leverage. A larger earnest money deposit might make a seller more willing to negotiate or accept the buyer's offer, as it signals a higher level of commitment and financial capability. Security for the buyer. The earnest money deposit is often refundable if the transaction falls through due to factors beyond the buyer's control, such as issues uncovered during the home inspection, failure to secure financing, or other contingencies specified in the purchase contract. The amount of the earnest money deposit varies and is usually a percentage of the property's purchase price, although it can be a fixed amount as well. The exact amount can be negotiated between the buyer and seller and is typically influenced by local market practices and the perceived value of the property. It's important for both buyers and sellers to clearly outline the terms related to the earnest money deposit in the purchase contract, including under what conditions the deposit will be refunded or forfeited. It's also advisable for buyers to work with their real estate agent and legal counsel to ensure that they understand the implications of the earnest money deposit and the contingencies associated with it. An earnest money deposit, EMD, also known as earnest money or a good faith deposit, is a sum of money that a buyer provides to a seller as a sign of their genuine intention to purchase a property or enter into a contract. It is typically a part of the home buying or real estate transaction process. The purpose of the earnest money deposit is to demonstrate the buyer's commitment and seriousness about the purchase. It shows the seller that the buyer is willing to put down a certain amount of money upfront to secure the deal and is less likely to back out of the transaction without valid reasons. Key points about earnest money deposits. Amount. The amount of earnest money deposit can vary and is often a percentage of the total purchase price of the property. The exact amount is negotiable between the buyer and the seller. Held in escrow. The earnest money deposit is typically held in an escrow account managed by a third party, such as a real estate brokerage or an attorney. This ensures that the money is kept safe until the transaction is finalized. Refundable under certain conditions. The terms under which the earnest money deposit is refundable or forfeited are usually outlined in the purchase agreement. Common conditions for refund include failed inspections, inability to secure financing, or other contingencies that may not be met. If the buyer backs out of the deal without a valid reason, the earnest money deposit may be forfeited to the seller. Applied toward purchase. If the transaction proceeds successfully, the earnest money deposit is typically applied towards the buyer's down payment or closing costs. Part of purchase contract. The details regarding the earnest money deposit are usually specified in the purchase contract. This includes the amount, the timeline for deposit, conditions for refund, and other relevant terms. Different from down payment. While the earnest money deposit is a preliminary payment made early in the process, the down payment is a larger sum paid at closing, which represents a portion of the total purchase price. It's important for both buyers and sellers to clearly understand the terms and conditions surrounding the earnest money deposit to avoid any misunderstandings or disputes during the course of the real estate transaction. An earnest money deposit, EMD, also known as a good faith deposit or earnest deposit, is a sum of money put forth by a buyer as a sign of their commitment and seriousness in a real estate transaction. It is often required when making an offer on a property to demonstrate the buyer's intention to follow through with the purchase. The purpose of the earnest money deposit is to provide some assurance to the seller that the buyer is genuinely interested in purchasing the property and is willing to put down a portion of the purchase price upfront. The deposit is typically held in an escrow account managed by a third party, such as a real estate brokerage or an attorney, until the closing of the sale. If the transaction proceeds smoothly and the sale is completed, the earnest money deposit is usually applied towards the buyer's down payment or closing costs. However, if the buyer backs out of the deal for reasons not covered by contingencies outlined in the purchase agreement, the seller might be entitled to keep the earnest money deposit as compensation for the time the property was off the market and any potential expenses incurred due to the failed transaction. It's important to note that the rules and regulations regarding earnest money deposits can vary based on local laws and customs, as well as the terms negotiated between the buyer and the seller in the purchase agreement. The amount of the earnest money deposit can also vary but is often a percentage of the purchase price, and it is generally higher in more competitive markets or for higher priced properties. An earnest money deposit, often referred to simply as earnest money, is a sum of money that a buyer pays to a seller as a sign of their genuine intent to purchase a property. This deposit is typically a percentage of the property's purchase price and is submitted along with the purchase offer. It serves as a way to demonstrate the buyer's seriousness and commitment to the transaction. Here's how the earnest money deposit works in a real estate transaction. Offer stage. When a buyer is interested in purchasing a property, they submit a purchase offer to the seller. Along with the offer, the buyer provides an earnest money deposit as a show of good faith. Trust account. The earnest money deposit is usually held in a designated escrow or trust account. This account is managed by a third party, often the seller's real estate agent or an escrow company, to ensure that the funds are secure and impartially managed. Protection for seller. The earnest money deposit provides some protection for the seller. If the buyer were to back out of the deal without a valid reason, the seller might be entitled to keep the earnest money as compensation for the time and effort they put into the transaction. Contingencies. Real estate transactions often involve contingencies, which are conditions that must be met for the sale to proceed. Common contingencies include inspections, appraisals, and mortgage approval. If a contingency isn't met, the buyer might be able to back out of the deal and get their earnest money deposit refunded. Applied to purchase. Assuming the transaction goes smoothly and all contingencies are met, the earnest money deposit is typically applied toward the down payment or closing costs of the property. Refund in certain cases. If the transaction falls through due to reasons outlined in the contract, such as an unresolved contingency, the buyer might be entitled to a refund of the earnest money deposit. We hope you found these tips helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.